For 30 years, Will Smith was untouchable. The movies, the fame, the perfect public image. He was Hollywood's golden boy, the fresh prince turned king. But then, two of comedy's fiercest voices spoke the truth no one else would: Jim Carrey and Eddie Murphy. Their words cracked the wall of perfection Hollywood had built around him. And suddenly, the questions everyone had whispered for decades demanded answers. What was really hiding behind the glitz, the charm, and the empire of one of the world's biggest stars? And how far does the truth go when legends start pointing the spotlight? Applause for violence. The standing ovation. That's the moment that broke the spell. Will Smith had just walked onto the Oscar stage and slapped Chris Rock in front of millions of viewers. He returned to his seat, and minutes later, the same room full of Hollywood's elite gave him a standing ovation when he won Best Actor. They applauded a man who had just committed an assault on live television. And that's when Jim Carrey said something that basically everyone outside that room was already thinking. He revealed he was sickened, not just by the slap, but by Hollywood's response to it. He called the industry spineless. He said that moment was a clear indication that Hollywood wasn't the cool club anymore. Think about what he was really saying. This wasn't about one celebrity having a bad moment. This was about an entire industry showing its true colors. They were applauding toxic masculinity because the guy doing the violence made them too much money to criticize. The standing ovation wasn't about supporting Will Smith as a person, and it was about protecting the investment. It was about sending a message that says, "We don't care what you do as long as you keep making us rich." But here's the thing about live television: you can't edit it. And once that moment happened, there was no going back. The corruption became visible to everyone watching at home. Carrey went further. He said that nobody has the right to walk up on stage and smack somebody in the face because they said words. That's not defending your wife. That's assault. And the fact that Hollywood's response was applause told you everything you needed to know about their priorities. Fractured persona. Jim Carrey didn't stop at criticizing the industry. He went deeper and analyzed what he thought was actually going on with Will Smith personally. And this is where it gets fascinating, because Carrey, in his typical philosophical way, went straight to the psychological root of the situation. He said the whole thing wasn't about defending Jada. It was about frustration. Pure ego-driven frustration that had been building for years. Carrey talked about how Will Smith created this image of himself over decades and became trapped inside it. He called it an avatar, this fake identity that demands constant validation, this constructed persona that needs everyone to see him as a protector, as a hero, as someone who has everything figured out. And when Chris Rock made a joke about Jada, it wasn't just a joke to Will Smith. It was an attack on his avatar. It was someone pulling back the curtain on the image he'd spent 30 years building. His reaction was to protect that image at all costs, even if it meant committing violence on live television in front of the entire world. Carrey said it didn't escalate. It came out of nowhere because Will has something going on inside him that's frustrated. And here's the deeper point Carrey was making. He believes that as an actor, you play characters, and if you go deep enough into those characters, you realize that your own character is pretty thin to begin with. Will Smith had been playing a character for so long that the line between the performance and the person disappeared completely. The Fresh Prince became the identity. The perfect family man became the mask he couldn't take off. And when someone threatened that mask, he lashed out violently. The silent verdict: if Jim Carrey was the philosopher dissecting Will Smith's psychology, Eddie Murphy was doing something far more surgical. At the Golden Globes, while accepting the Cecil B. DeMille Award for Lifetime Achievement, Murphy delivered a line that landed like a missile. Pay your taxes, mind your business, and keep Will Smith's wife's name out of your mouth. A punchline? Yes, but one loaded with decades of context. Murphy doesn't do award shows. He doesn't play the Hollywood press game. He avoids the machine entirely. For him, rooms filled with celebrities, trophies, and staged performances feel alien. Just showing up is a calculated exception. And that night, he wasn't performing for laughs. He was making a statement. The rare moment when Eddie Murphy uses a platform to speak directly, unfiltered, commands attention. To grasp why this moment resonated, look at Murphy's history. At the 2007 Oscars, he lost Best Supporting Actor for Dreamgirls to Alan Arkin. What did he do? He walked out. Not for theatrics, not for spectacle, but because he refused to participate in the performative sadness of Hollywood. He wouldn't let his disappointment be repackaged as entertainment. That moment reveals everything about Murphy's stance. Awards, applause, and celebrity theater are fake. He's an architect of comedy who measures truth over optics. So when Murphy returned decades later, accepted the DeMille Award, and directed a public critique at Will Smith, it wasn't a joke, it was a reckoning. One line encapsulated his distaste for Hollywood's manufactured culture, his understanding of toxic behavior, and the silent tensions lurking beneath the industry's golden veneer. People listened because when Murphy speaks, it's rarely entertainment, it's judgment. And that judgment, aimed squarely at Smith, carried more weight than any viral clip or soundbite ever could. The PR marriage Will Smith with his red table talk and his public displays of emotion and his crying acceptance speeches represents basically everything Murphy despises about Hollywood celebrities. And that brings us to red table talk itself, because if you want to understand why both Carrey and Murphy have issues with the Smiths, you need to look at what that show was actually doing. Remember the episode where Jada admitted she'd had a relationship with August Alsina while she and Will were separated? Will was sitting there like this hurt husband who was going to forgive his wife. The whole thing became a meme. People were mocking their entire act. But here's what Carrey and Murphy were pointing out. This whole interview was a calculated PR move. It was a decision to turn their marriage problems into content, to monetize their pain, to make Will Smith a victim and a long-suffering husband who was going to forgive his wayward wife. By being the one who forgives, by being the one who cries on camera, Will controlled the narrative. He became the hero of his own scandal. All those weird rumors about his own behavior suddenly got buried under the buzz of this interview. The entanglement became the story, and everything else disappeared. That's what Jim Carrey meant when he talked about the fake image Will Smith has created. The man had become so skilled at managing his public persona that even his marriage problems became an opportunity for reputation management. Tint. Cracks in the icon. Now that both Carrey and Murphy have opened the floodgates, everyone's starting to ask questions that nobody wanted to ask before. And that's where things get complicated, because there's been a lot floating around on the internet that suddenly feels like it deserves a closer look. Brother Bilal, who worked as Will Smith's assistant, made some explosive claims about what he allegedly witnessed. Hollywood assistants see everything. They're in the car. They're in the house. They're around when regular people aren't. And sometimes when they leave those jobs, they share personal stories. Bilal's claims were specific and detailed, and while they remain allegations, they added fuel to a fire that was already burning. Jaguar Wright made claims about the Smith household as well. She's not some random person either, and she's someone who exposed Diddy long before anyone else was willing to talk about him publicly. Her allegations about what allegedly happened with young men who came to the Smiths for mentorship were disturbing, Heavy allegations that have never been verified but also haven't gone away. There's also Alexis Arquette, an actor from the famous Arquette family, who made claims about Will Smith's first marriage before passing away. Will was married to Cherie Zampino in the early 90s, and that marriage ended very quickly. According to Alexis, there were reasons beyond what the public was told. During the height of Hollywood's silent era, nobody talked about this stuff openly. And for a guy whose entire image was built on being a perfect family man, having rumors like this circulating would be devastating to his brand. The Vivien recast. Let's go back to something that happened way before any of this recent drama. Something that took place on a TV set in 1993 during the filming of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Looking back, this might have been the first real warning sign that people chose to ignore. Janet Hubert played Aunt Vivien for the first 3 seasons of Fresh Prince. Then, suddenly, she was replaced by Daphne Maxwell Reid. The official story, the one that got published everywhere, was that Janet Hubert was difficult, unprofessional, and wanted to be the star of the show. The classic Hollywood narrative of the difficult black woman. But according to Janet, that's not what happened at all. She had a contract dispute. She was asking for fair pay. And when she refused to accept a bad deal, the machine turned against her. Will Smith, instead of supporting his co-star, led the charge in branding her as the problem. In a reunion episode years later, Janet shared her perspective sitting beside Will Smith. She explained that words can kill. She lost everything. Her reputation. Everything. She pointed out that calling a black woman difficult in Hollywood is the kiss of death. It's hard enough being a dark-skinned black woman in this business without having a powerful co-star working against you. The trailer incident. Jump forward to 2012 when Will Smith was filming Men in Black 3 in New York City. This story perfectly captures the mindset of a man who believed consequences were for other people. Will Smith owned a luxury apartment in the city. He had access to 5-star hotels on every block. He could have stayed anywhere. Instead, he demanded that production rent him a massive double-decker trailer unit. A 53-foot behemoth that reportedly cost $2 million. It had a full gym inside, multiple rooms, and everything a movie star could want. And he parked it on the streets of Soho. The trailer blocked traffic. It blocked local businesses. Residents complained about the noise and fumes. People who lived in that neighborhood suddenly had their daily lives disrupted because Will Smith wanted his portable palace parked outside. When complaints started pouring in, something interesting happened. Will Smith refused to move. He didn't apologize. He didn't compromise. He simply decided that his comfort mattered more than an entire neighborhood's inconvenience. Think about that for a second. This is a man worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He had options, and he had resources. He could have solved this problem a dozen different ways without anyone suffering. But he chose to dig in. He chose to make it everyone else's problem. This isn't just celebrity privilege. This is something deeper. This is a man who genuinely believed the rules didn't apply to him. That's not a mindset you develop overnight. That's what happens when you've been protected for 30 years. When every room you enter rearranges itself around your needs. When nobody ever tells you no. That trailer sitting on those Soho streets was a preview of what was coming. A man who believed he could do whatever he wanted without consequences. The 2023 Golden Globes fiasco. The 2023 Golden Globes ceremony was even more significant than people realized at the time. The show was hosted by Jared Carmichael, and during the ceremony, he did this bit about Will Smith that made everyone in the room visibly uncomfortable. He presented Smith with a fake award called the Rock Hudson Award, for Best Portrayal of Masculinity on Television. Now, if you don't know who Rock Hudson was, he was a closeted actor from the old studio system era. He was famous for playing these hyper-masculine leading men while living a completely different life in private. So Jared was basically comparing Will to Hudson. And here's the genius of that joke. If Will or Jada had gotten upset about it, it would have looked like they were admitting the joke was true. So they just sat there and smiled while the audience tried to figure out if they should laugh or not. That discomfort in the room was palpable. Everyone knew what was being implied, but nobody could say anything about it. But that was just the warm-up. The main event was Eddie Murphy's speech. When Murphy took the stage to accept his Cecil B. DeMille Award, the entire atmosphere shifted. This guy is a legend, and he almost never does stuff like this. The fact that he was there at all was significant. And then he delivered that line about keeping Will Smith's wife's name out of your mouth. The room erupted. People went crazy. But what most people missed about that moment was the intention behind it. Murphy later clarified it wasn't just a throwaway joke. He was making a deliberate point about toxic masculinity. And everyone who heard it understood exactly what he was saying. When legends clash. The tension between Jim Carrey and Will Smith didn't begin at the Oscars. It traces back decades. In the mid-90s, Carrey was a force of nature, wild, unpredictable, and unstoppable. Ace Ventura had just exploded, and The Mask became a phenomenon, grossing over $350 million worldwide. Carrey was everywhere, and the world loved him for it. Meanwhile, Will Smith was trying to transition from music to movies. The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air was a cultural juggernaut on TV, but his film career hadn't yet taken off. Legend has it that Smith was considered for the role of Stanley Ipkiss in The Mask, but Carrey got it. The film became a massive hit and cemented Carrey as a top-tier movie star. Smith had to wait. Bad Boys, Independence Day, and his eventual rise came a few years later. Those waiting years, watching Carrey dominate, reportedly left a trace of bitterness, a quiet, simmering tension that never fully disappeared. Fast forward to today, and that history matters more than ever. After the Oscars controversy, Carrey's words weren't just commentary. They were decades-old grudges coming to the surface. Eddie Murphy added fuel to the fire, and suddenly, the aura around Smith began to crack. The once untouchable star, whose films grossed over $9 billion worldwide, released Emancipation. Box office numbers were underwhelming, critical acclaim sparse. Studios that once bet millions on his name are now cautious. The spell is broken. No longer the safe investment, Smith faces the reality of Hollywood's bottom line. Talent alone isn't enough if the risk of association outweighs profit. The empire built over 30 years is still standing, but the foundation has shifted. What happens when the golden boy of Hollywood discovers even legends have limits? And can Will Smith ever reclaim the untouchable status that seemed permanent for decades? For 30 years, Will Smith existed inside a protective bubble that money and power created. He could do almost anything, and the industry would look the other way, because he was too valuable to criticize. But then, two comedians who had nothing to lose decided to speak the truth. Jim Carrey called out the psychology of a man trapped inside his own manufactured image. Eddie Murphy used his lifetime achievement moment to deliver a line that will be remembered longer than most of the movies that won awards that night. The stories that are resurfacing now aren't new. They've been floating around Hollywood for years. The difference is that people are finally willing to listen. The wall of silence that protected Will Smith for decades is crumbling. And it's not because the industry suddenly developed morals. It's because the cost of protecting him finally became higher than the cost of letting the truth come out. What do you think about all of this? Are we finally seeing the real Will Smith after 30 years of carefully managed image control? Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more. I'll see you in the next one.